Now, for each of the panelists, not Tim, he's already at his desk, but each of the panelists move on up to the table. I'm actually going to take the opportunity to leverage Tim's talk with the first question, which is related to facilities, what the proving grounds would need to be for each of the panelists up there. We've had a nice range of panelists from industry and academia and different professions. So Tim gave us a specific vision for what he thought a facility would need. I'm going to pose that same question to each of three panelists up there. What do you see as the most important capability of a arena or proving grounds? And the second question is, what could you describe as possibly unexpected, unusual capability that one may want in the proving grounds, something that people generally may not think of? So why don't we start with, well, I'll see Paul at the end. We'll just start from that end and move on down. Yes.
All right. Thanks for the question. So I think from most of the things that I've heard here, one of the key things that we're finding out dealing with a lot of regolith is that regolith handling, even in a proving grounds, is a big challenge. Like I said, I just ordered 25,000 kilograms of this stuff. They come in super bags. They weigh 1,000 to 1,300 kilograms. You got to dry this stuff. You got to operate in it, which means you have to wear PPE. Like Tim's nice drawings. It's a great facility, but if you want to have regolith in there, you don't want to have that tray come out of that big giant room with all the dust. You need to be able to handle and offload the large equipment to carry these bags. So really, lunar dust handling, even in our test facility, is going to be a big challenge. Having desks right there and things like that, very difficult to have mixed use when you deal with that nasty stuff. To me, that is also here on Earth one of the biggest challenges to deal with for a facility like this.
All right, Sam, your question, what do you see the most important capabilities for proving grounds and some possibly unexpected, unusual capabilities you?
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree with Paul. I mean, that's really the biggest issue is the handling of the dust, and also the facility itself in terms of the air control and ventilation, making sure that you have environmentally sound and safe environment as well. But I don't think I can add any more to what Paul said. As far as the unexpected issue of something, from my perspective, we're building, landing pads. We have to be able to burn. Burns are pretty tall, pretty intensive in terms of the amount of regolith you need to have. One of the concepts we're looking at is pulling, shoving regolith over a crater wall, for example, for pulling down that amount of material at one time. How do you do that kind of thing and simulate that in an analog environment? So and then also the unexpected, when you lay down the regolith in these, especially the outdoor facilities, it's loose. It's not probably, you can probably compact it, but how are we going to deal with the unexpected nature of dealing with a hardened, compacted regolith that's on the surface? The top layer is pretty fluffy. When we start getting down into it, how are we going to be able to figure that out and have the machinery that we're building deal with that with two different environments, gravity environments as well?
Thank you, Sam. Nick, you come at it from a slightly different viewpoint.
Yeah, I'd say probably an admittedly biased viewpoint. I think it was Eisenhower who said that quantity has a quality all of its own. And so I think that's a difficult thing for us to capture with some lunar test beds, is the sheer number of craters, the size of craters, and then the kilometer scale testing environment that people have been hitting on. How do you actually capture that and maintain your more realistic regolith environment? I don't necessarily have a solution for that, but I think we just need to be cognizant of where we can sacrifice with our testing and recognize that there's probably not going to be one testing proving ground that serves all different needs. And so there may be a constellation of proving grounds out there where you go here for this type of activity and you go here for this type of activity. And maybe that's just the most pragmatic way for us to do it. It's probably prohibitively expensive to make an all-in-one facility. That's kind of what my gut is telling me.
Interesting. We'd call that the moon.
Yeah, hopefully we're not doing too much testing on the moon. I think the other wild card that I threw out there is kind of the radiation component of it. It's difficult for us to quantify that. It can be difficult to create that type of environment, especially at scale. And so again, admittedly, coming from a biased perspective at the NNSS, there are certain parts of the test site that are quite radioactive. Most of it is not. But as long as you can quantify that, you can mitigate the risk and then potentially incorporate that into planning or testing. And that might be another consideration when selecting a test site.
Thank you very much. All right, so now we've had time for people to put questions in Slido, and one of the top ones is related to regolith. And I think I want to modify that question a bit and expand upon it, which was, well, like, can you compare your simulant against commercially available simulants? I'll expand upon that and make the question of what is the major characteristics for you that you need in a simulant, and what is the major challenge you have with achieving that characteristic, whether it's cost or quality or mineralogy or something like that. And Tim, I'm going to start with you, even though you come from a propulsion background. There was a comment about putting simulants in your facilities. Your thoughts to start off with on what you need in a simulant and your challenges, your biggest challenge for it.
Certainly, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I turned on my camera. I don't know if that helps a little bit in conveying that I am here. Really, I'm a real person. Let's see. The thing that comes to my mind is when last year we operated a small chemical thruster in an altitude chamber I have here at Purdue. And the whole goal was to see the interaction between the plume, the exhaust plume, that chemical thruster, with regular stimulant. And I can tell you two things that came to mind, became very obvious right away. One, when we pumped the chamber down to go from atmospheric pressure to vacuum, the whole reservoir simulant we had started bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. And it would stay on like this for tens of minutes. All the air trapped in between the particles would just come up to the surface and bubble and bubble. We had spent hours before pumping the chamber down in compacting everything down and making sure we knew the compaction level of the regolith, and that got lost in 30 seconds flat as soon as we pumped the chamber down. So doing that sort of the work we want to do will need to take that into account. It will take days to pump these things down. That's one. Two, the other thing we saw right after we fired the thruster in the therefore unknown compaction level is that that dust went absolutely everywhere. It coated every single surface of that chamber. So I completely agree with whomever said when you handle that dust, that regolith in a thermal vacuum chamber containing that will be absolutely critical. And yes, that tray will look very, very different in practice than in that rendering.
Thank you. I think that was Paul who made that comment. And
right.
We'll
right.
move on to Paul with the same question.
One thing that I guess the question was what kind of properties do you need in your simulant, right? And
for your particular effort, yeah.
Yeah, so we do mostly things like excavation and construction, and so the geotechnical qualities of the simulant are the most important for what I do mostly. However, we also do some ice extraction, and so things like microwave interaction, for instance, might also be important. And in that case, what do you call it? The I can't think of the word. Magnetic properties are also really important. Susceptibility, for instance. Now, my simulant is mostly geotechnical in nature, and so those kinds of tests I cannot do with the existing simulant. So large scale, I couldn't do that. So you might need a specialized batch to do that specific test, for instance. But at large scale for construction that we're talking about, I simply cannot afford $35 a kilogram. It's just not feasible. And so we have to make a compromise there. And so this is where I think the TRL and the relevant environment discussion is really important. What level of fidelity of the simulant do you need to get realistic results for the question you're trying to answer with the test you're doing, right? And so one simulant is not going to fit everything. It's just like Nick was saying that not any test site can fit everything. And so you have to be kind of picky with those kinds of things. For me, it's mostly geotechnical. So I care about the mineral composition, anortite and basaltic scoria, and particle size distributions and particle shapes, but that's about it. So that's for my particular testing generally.
So we have two areas. One is the geotechnical, which is being able to have just a good mechanical simulant that can give us some data that is valid for the tractions of the robots and all that. But then we also have the melting part of it, the high fidelity simulant that we use for the properties of melter and understanding the heat regimes. And if we're going to do an end-to-end test where we've excavated the simulant that's in the ground part of it, where the mechanical simulant is, bring it to a sorter, filterer, using that same simulant, this doesn't work out for us. We have to use another quality, high fidelity quality simulant to bring it to the melter itself. So it doesn't really, it's a handoff, right? We get the simulant from the mechanical simulant over to the filter, and it does its thing, but it's not what we're going to use in the analog environment. What do? We just swap it out. That's not going to give us what's going to be being done on the lunar surface. So I don't really know how they're going to address that, other than we just simulate the idea that we've done the filter and the sieving, and it's somehow magically brought over to the melter, and it's the same simulant that it came from. Does that make any sense?
Thank you, Sam. Nick, I don't know if you have a comment on this. If not, I'll move on to the next question, which we only have time for one more question, and I'm going to modify yet another one from the Slido thing, which related to energy. The question actually was for Sam, which is, how much energy does it take to make one brick out of regolith, and how many bricks does it take to make a launch pad? I'd like you to focus on how much energy it takes to make the brick, but also, how do you get the energy into your machine? Is it, like electrical, thermal, or whatnot? Then I'd like each of the panelists to talk about how can you test energy distribution, power distribution at your facilities, such as perhaps power beaming or something like that. We only have, unfortunately, 3 minutes for this. So how about 1 minute per panelist, and then we'll move on.
I'll just say that we've done some power calculations on, not per brick part of it. We've got one calculation that says for a 100-meter pad, we'll need 87,000 bricks, basically, which is a lot. And then the power requirement would be, depending on whether you're going to do it in the middle of the night, if you have lighting involved, anywhere from 40 kilowatts up to 120 kilowatts of power from whatever power source it is, and we're looking at nuclear power.
Thank you. Okay, now thoughts from, all right, how about Nick on how can you support the testing power facilities at your facility, including, power beaming?
Yeah, in addition to the Nevada National Security Site, there are a couple other security sites around the country. INL, Idaho National Lab in particular, is quite heavily involved with nuclear propulsion testing and testing of space-based nuclear energy systems. We're supporting the Draco program right now at the NNSS, if you're familiar with that. And if you rewind the clock, the NERVA program, if any of the students are not familiar with that one, Google that one, it's pretty cool. Also occurred at the NNSS. So suffice it to say, they're pretty extensive infrastructure in place to test high risk, high energy nuclear propulsion systems.
Thanks. All right. How about Paul, then Tim?
All right. So power testing. Yeah. So we're actually one of the phase 2, level 2 Watts on the Moon participants. And so one of the tests we have scheduled in the next couple of weeks actually is to test superconducting cable power transfer in our dusty thermal vacuum chamber. So we're going to transfer power through our cable and make sure that our thermal and electrical assumptions that we're making for the full system actually can be measured and demonstrated in relevant environment, basically. So so that's the test we can do. But it's limited in size. My chamber is about 2 meters long, and so the cable length is limited, so we can't do the full 3 kilometers in that sense. But we can test all the assumptions, thermal and vacuum. So those are the kind of things as far as power goes. For the big facility we'd like to build, you want to probably do the full 10 kilowatt power deployment systems and things like that in the lunar dusty, maybe not vacuum conditions, but operations. So that'd be nice to be able to do. That's for future.
Thank you. Talk about big facilities and plans for it. Maybe Tim has some comments on that.
Yeah, you know, I'll conclude with putting nuclear systems in those on the moon and so forth will take quite a bit of work, in particular or including in the policy domain. It will be interesting to see how the general public react to launching nuclear reactors onto the surface of the moon, for example.
True enough. All right, thank you. Unfortunately, I have to cut it off now. I just want to thank the panelists. Nice, diverse discussion. It really shows the diversity that's needed in Lunar Proving Grounds and across focus group collaborations. All right, thank you, everyone.